My name is Adelaide Meadow, and I am a physiologist, and I run a well woman care practice as well as supporting women in pregnancy, birth, and postpartum. So I see all sorts of pelvic health concerns, and I feel like I always want to include in all of my work an aspect of movement capacity and strength capacity for women as a crucial component of our pelvic health. So I'm by no means saying that everything is healed through our movement practices. However, I find in our holistic health, we talk a lot about diet, we talk a lot about hormones, we talk a lot about maybe like digestion, our mood, our nervous system. And one thing that is often not super well expressed is how literally every single one of those structures is entirely structurally dependent on our like biomechanical system. And how if we are interested in um, hi, Marnie. I'm not sure why you're spotlighted. Okay. If we're, but hi, it's good to see you. So, if we're interested in really looking at our women's health from a broader physiological perspective, then I think it's super essential to be understanding how, for example, our nervous system, our endocrine system, our digestive system, our reproductive systems are all totally informed and supported by our structural capacity. So, I'm gonna have you mute, Ashley, if you don't mind. Um, okay, thank you. And I can't turn all of your mics off like in one fell swoop. So I'll do it if I like don't mind if they come on. It's okay. But I'll see if I can get it if you don't catch it. So so that's really what we're here to talk about today is how how specifically this focus on women's physiological movement is can be interwoven with the concept of strength training, because obviously this is a huge topic of movement for the female body that I talk a lot about. But I really want to start this conversation by saying that I am, yes, I'm like a fitness person and a fitness teacher, but I am first and foremost a woman who works in women's health and pelvic health. So I come at all of our movement from an integrated pelvic health and like birth attending perspective, rather than from like a, personal trainer or CrossFit background or something like that. Which isn't to say, I mean, I've been a personal trainer for more than a decade, so I feel pretty well grounded in that work too. But I'm here not for fitness sake, but like how movement and strength training influences our women's health more broadly. Does that distinction make sense? Does that feel clear? Okay. So I just want everyone to do this for a second. Just like give me some flashers with your hands. Okay. So this is really helpful because you're all tiny Hollywood squares, and I'm going to be like, are you following along? Do you have a question? And if I'm like, does that make sense? If it does, like, this is your yes. And if you're like, no, I have no idea what you're talking about, just like knock it, and then I'll be able to see. And it just helps me track with the group a little better. So thanks for that. Okay, so we have a huge amount of content that I hope to get through today. And I'm just going to do our little like outline intro and tell you what we're going to cover. Then we did have a few questions that I did want to start with, because this is an interactive group, and the reality of asking questions is such a gift to other women. We really only learn in context of other women. So I want to absolutely make time for the questions of the women that are here. And if you want to put your questions in the chat, well, I'll try to answer them there. And I can also speak to them as well. So, but first, overall, what we're going to cover in this masterclass is just what is strength training? Like, what are we actually talking about? And then we're going to talk about the benefits of strength training, so what it is and what it benefits, and specifically for our female physiology. We're then going to discuss the setbacks of modern movement, and specifically how these setbacks of modern movement relate to our pelvic health. We're then going to talk about how those aspects of modern movement that are not incorporated for most of us in our daily living can be recreated through our strength training practice in a way that is ultimately optimal for our pelvic health and longevity. So, like, what are these aspects of functional movement? Where are they missing from our modern life? How do they relate to strength training? And then how do we do that as women? Then we're going to go through some practical tips where I broke this into a 4 categories of things that are missing from modern life. And we're going to go through, as I said, some strength training ways to address them, but then we're going to also go through some lifestyle ways to address them. So how many women are like, I have children at home and I'm not going to get to the gym and I want to figure out how to do this better in my daily life? Give me some flashers if that's you. Okay. So we're definitely going to go through how to accomplish some of that in your modern day life. From there, we're going to talk, we're going to circle back to talking about pain, and I'm going to give an opportunity for women that are in pain to discuss that and be able to ask questions in regard to like, I have pain here, I have pain there, and this is what has challenged me from movement or strength training in the past. So I really don't want to sort of pass over common structural complaints. So we're going to discuss that a little bit. And then we're going to finish up with how do you really work with centering your women's health and your strength training more broadly and centering your pelvic health. So that's an ambitious outline, but we're going to get to all of it, I promise. And then at the end of the call, obviously there'll be some time for questions, and then I'm going to have an offering and a coupon code for you if you do want to dive in and learn more. So even if you can't stay for the end of the call, be sure you check the email or get the replay so you don't miss out on any of that stuff. Okay. All right. So just some questions that were right off the bat. Where we started is there was a woman being like, I want to learn how to strength train with diastasis, and I want to learn to strength train with an umbilical hernia. So totally, strength training can help absolutely both of those physiological circumstances. And what I was saying is they're related. They both have to do with the linea alba, which is that band of connective tissue that runs from the bottom of our sternum all the way down towards our pubis. And that band of connective tissue thins and widens. It dilates and effaces during pregnancy, and that's what causes this diastasis recti. But that thinning also can allow for something like an umbilical hernia by creating like a hernia portal, which is essentially a passageway through fascial tissue that allows like some type of tissue to be displaced in regards to our like fascial structure. So absolutely working with the musculature that's going to reintegrate and support that fascia will change the shape of that connective tissue over time. But in the case of an umbilical hernia, what also can be really helpful is figuring out where our organs are, or maybe like how that laxity has rearranged the organs within our whole pelvic and trunk, canister, which that can be really, what can be really helpful there is just a skillful hands-on body worker who knows what's up for internal organ female placement. Because of course the medical model says that there's like nothing we can do to heal an umbilical hernia. And while I do think that there are some structural changes that might, sustain, I do think the actual symptomatic aspects of a hernia can be improved through some of the structural strength integration in context with really good like internal organ myofascial work. The one that's coming to mind is the Mercier technique. This is like one technique of organ level fascial manipulation. So we can put that in the chat too if there's anyone near you that does that, unless you happen to be near me in the world, in which case I'll see if I can come to you. Okay. So those were our questions right off the bat, and then we're just gonna dive in. All right. So what is strength training? Anybody? This is not a trick question. Anybody want to pop in? Don't be afraid. Okay, how many of you feel like you've ever strength trained? Who's ever like gone to the gym and picked up a weight? Okay, cool. Then I'm gonna call on you. Emily, what is strength training?
Strength training is building muscle, in my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, I would consider that strength
Building
training.
muscle, right?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's totally right. Anyone else have anything to add to building muscle? Anything? Who else raised their hand and says they've ever strength trained? Okay, yeah, Carissa.
It's like also building like mental capacity for like doing more.
Totally. Yeah. Okay. So between the two of you, you just hit on the two major, and hello to I have, love that you've strength trained. There's kind of two main components of our strength training. And so if we just like Google a definition, we're going to come up with strength training known as resistance training, meaning it's a type of exercise that uses either body weight or equipment to build muscle mass, strength, and endurance, which like that's a pretty basic concept, right? Pretty, fundamental definition. But what I really like here is the concept of resistance, right? And so meaning you are moving your body against load, right? Or you're actually moving load through space. And so that load might be your own body weight, meaning like doing a push-up. The way I'm actually holding my body from a calisthenic perspective is requiring that my muscles move the load of my body weight. Or I might be like moving an actual weight, moving a weight on a machine, using a band that's creating resistance. But that is a crucial aspect of it, is that I'm actually moving load through space, right? Which makes it somewhat distinct from maybe other aspects of movement in the sense, or other aspects of like exercise, like running. Obviously, this is obvious, but like running is not strength training. Yes, I suppose you're moving load through space, but it's not actually targeting muscles to be able to move in that way. Does that basic difference make sense? Moving load through space under resistance. Okay. And as Carissa just brought up, what that is going to do is it's going to, or as I guess Emily brought up, is she's like, it's going to strengthen my muscles. Totally. It is going to strengthen your muscles. It's also going to load your connective tissue and put your connective tissue or your connective tissue system, your fascia, in different shapes depending on how you strength train, and create some like tone or ideally resiliency within our connective tissue. It also has capacity to increase our bone density. So it's not only our muscles that are actually involved in strength training or resistance training. And then as Carissa brought up, the other thing that's super crucial, and I would say it is 50% neurological and 50% physiological. Now, to say, of course, our neurology is part of our physiology, so maybe that kind of falls apart linguistically. But what I mean by that is the neurological capacity of strength training is a massive actual component of this work. And what that means is our brain needs to learn how to actually have our muscles fire and our connective tissue move and our bones move in a way that is ideally supportive for optimal function. And that learning, how many people have ever been like, oh my God, I like get what you're saying, but it's so hard to actually do. Like it's so hard to like actually do that movement. Okay, that is as much the capacity of your muscles or your connective tissue to create that shape as it is your neurological pathways that allow the muscles or the bones or the fascia to glide into those sort of ranges of motion or into that pattern, meaning this fires first, then that, then that. Because it's not just like, do my glutes fire? It's, do they fire first? Do they fire second? Like, what's the actual order of operations? And how does the whole system begin to work together smoothly? And that is a neurological learning process. How many people have ever done something and they've done it like 4 times and they don't feel like their muscles are going to give out, but they like can't do another rep? You're like, I'm like shaking and I like can't quite accomplish another one. So anyone ever had that experience where you're like doing something? Yeah. And you just feel super fatigued kind of, but it's not that like your muscle is like burning. You just like can't quite accomplish it. That's a nervous system stressor, right? That's creating nervous system resiliency, new neural pathways. And that is a huge aspect of our strength training. So I kind of have these 2 pieces where we're building strength and we're building strength from a physiological perspective, and then also this capacity from a neurological perspective. Now, the overall goal, I would say, as we are learning to strength train and move our bodies in these new ways and move them under resistance, is to be moving from, and I'm sure if you've heard some of my courses before, is to be moving from this concept of micromanagement to macromanagement to non-management. Meaning initially when we start training, and I definitely train this way a lot, both myself and my students, I'm really looking at the fine details, because I always say the devil's in the details. And it's like, what are my feet doing? What's my breath doing? What are my ribs doing? What's happening with my pelvic floor? What muscles are firing? And it's really this kind of micromanagement of the movements. And the idea is not that we're forever going to be micromanaging movements, but that we really learn and teach the body and develop this robust neurological memory of how to actually create these actions in the body. So then we can like macro manage it, meaning I put my body in that shape, but I don't have to have as many sort of like fine-tuned cues. So then eventually I'll be able to do, say, an action of daily living without having to like set up and really manage every aspect of that movement without having it be compromising to my pelvic health or my long-term health overall. Does that feel clear, that progression? And often I find that we first train in micromanagement and then we train in macromanagement, and then we actually find that this non-management after a while starts to emerge in our lifestyles. So then it's not something that I have to like do so much. I can just actually pick up my kid or carry a car seat or carry a bag of grain if you do what I do. And you're not totally managing every single action that you're doing, but you have spent the time doing that. So our body starts to really learn how to accomplish that stuff in a way that's supportive to our pelvic health. Yeah, building a base. And I would say totally building a base of strength, but also building a base of neurological capacity. And this is like why I'm bringing up both, where it's not like I have a pretty good, strong base in that, like I can actually lift a fair amount, but I really, for certain lifts, have to be like, okay, my foot placement, my heel placement, my internal rotation, are my glutes firing? And I can actually accomplish the lift quite well. So I have like a good strength base. But then if someone just like threw me a 40-pound medicine ball, would I actually accomplish all those actions without that micromanagement? Probably not, because I'm still building that neurological base for those actions and doing that together with women. And those two, those two pillars are what's going to make us actually be more comfortable in our actions of daily living, not just actually the strength capacity. Does that feel clear? Right. And that's really what we're here to talk about. Okay. So who here has ever had this idea that like I shouldn't have to strength train? Like my ancestors didn't strength train. Like, do I really have to like lift weights? Like women have not done this for all of human history. I definitely feel like this sometimes. Anybody else feel like this? Okay, thank you for raising your hand. And yeah, while this is true in many ways, maybe some of you, I just had a big meme dump that came out this week, and you're like, yeah, they didn't strength train, but they did all of these other actions of daily living, specifically ones that had to do with an agrarian lifestyle. So I was just, and there was a big shift in this, largely starting in the Industrial Revolution, which began in, if we're thinking this is not true like globally in the same way, I can't speak to sort of the entire world in terms of the kind of cultural pretext of when these movement patterns started to change. But definitely, if I am speaking from like an Anglo-European perspective, which of course there are plenty of others that we will also touch on in this call. But the Industrial Revolution definitely became, brought about a change in the way that, sort of out of cottage industry and into a very different sort of monotonous work pattern that was existent not just for women, but for men, or not just for men, but also for women. So instead of, for example, like setting up my loom to do textile creation at home, and I would set it up just out of reach of my child who is growing every year. So I'm actually like lifting up the surface on which my loom is every year in regards to like the height of my toddler or whatever. And like having these varying, this is just one example, having these sort of varying movements that change and throughout, by your own making and undoing of daily life. We then shifted to women actually being away from their children, working in out of the home settings for like up to 12 hours a day, doing monotonous tasks that are partially mechanized. Right. And so I feel like we have this idea, you're like, oh my gosh, women never really needed to do this. But we have actually seen some form of like women doing movement that is healing uniquely for their body from the start of the Industrial Revolution, which is, depending on where we are in the world, I would say that really started in the 17th century in Western Europe and about a century later here in the United States. So there is an actual rich history. But there hasn't been as much to back it up, and it really wasn't proliferated in our cultural context. So what I mean by that is like women actually were having pelvic health concerns during a lot of this time, because I feel like we hear now, you're like, oh my gosh, how are we at a 50% incontinence rate? How are we at a 50% prolapse rate? Well, we don't actually have these numbers for me to refer to, like looking back into history. I imagine they probably were started to climb significantly at that start of the industrialized workforce, right? So it's not just our like tech heavy culture, right? It is, I think it's been on the rise really, all throughout the like industrial revolution. And now we've had the digital revolution where I feel like it's definitely shifted again. So just a little context there. I also feel like in our modern culture, we are often who feels like they're trying to like get back to some ancestral ways. Like I'm trying to like track my cycle and like homestead or cook food at home or whatever it is. And that's amazing, right? I feel like we definitely are, really working towards things that ultimately might be super supportive to our physiology or maybe to our culture more broadly. But I would say one thing that we're not actually doing is really getting back to sort of how we are moving in those ways, even despite our like barefoot shoe movement or, our, wanting to, like, I'm sitting on the floor or looking at my laptop right now. And I think that the like overall concept is like, yeah, these small things totally can make a big difference. But in general, our bodies aren't actually still functioning in that evolutionary sort of imperative that has happened for 20,000 years prior to really the last 200 years where we've seen a higher incidence, I believe, in women's health concerns. So all this to say, I mean, we're here to talk about strength training, and we just went on a little foray down memory lane in women's history. But the vibe being that if we are really wanting to be in respect of our biology and our physiology, we are here to invent what that looks like and have a women's pelvic informed and women's reproductive informed strength training culture that we're in the midst of really creating now, and learning for ourselves how to be optimizing our bodies and our strength. Okay. A few notes on on just like two things, and we'll come back to these later in the hour. But who here has been like, women used to squat endlessly? They used to squat and do all this work. How many women have like told this? Like, I'd be better at squatting when you used to squat all the time. Okay, I don't see too many hands, so maybe some of you are thinking this. But one thing I already right off the bat want to say is that yes, women squatted, but more so women hinged, right? Women actually didn't squat and like do dishes for hours. You actually like hinge, think flat back, butt back, and bent over with like one forearm resting on your leg and the other hand doing skilled work on the ground or on a low surface. And so like hinging, I would argue, more than squatting, being one of like the lost shapes of womanhood. And it's definitely one that we don't practice in our contemporary like lifestyles that often. I feel like a lot of us like work on our squats in our yoga practice or whatever, or maybe go to the gym and try to do back squats. But ultimately, I feel like we're missing what I would argue is the kind of more essential for the female body action, which is really functional hinging. And we're going to talk about that a little later and how it can be incorporated into daily life as well as strength training. The other one that I think we don't do a lot of is pulling. We live in a pushing focused culture. We push we push the floor away in down dog, or we do push-ups, or we push a stroller, or I push whatever, push. And we're actually not as integrated in our pulling actions. The idea that I maybe would have like rowed a boat, the idea that I would have always pulled a wagon with a child rather than pushed a stroller, the idea that I would be pulling water up from a well, right? These all actions are that I'd be doing push-pulling actions for using a washboard, right? Where the primary of like dragging it back up against the grain. If you're going to see a washboard, right, the resistance is on the way up, the pulling action, not on the way down, right? And so these actions of modern living, specifically pulling, is one that has really been largely missing from actions of daily living lately. And pulling primarily strengthens the posterior chain, meaning we're like utilizing our back body, and strong posterior chain actions are essential for female pelvic health function. So the loss of hinging and the loss of pulling actions and actions of daily living are really something that I like to prioritize in strength training for the female body, and things that have absolutely helped me. And I might argue, how many of you think of your like strength training and you think of like, should I do squats and push-ups? Like, how many of you are like, oh, that's what I should do? And I'm just like, right, strength training for men, it's like de-emphasizing the two essential actions that I would argue, which are actually pulling and hinging, not squatting and pushing. So just bringing this back. Something I started doing hinging. I started hinging to do all of the things in my prolapse. Overall, my body feels so much better. Love that for her. Okay. And all right, who here feels like they can like carry a 30-pound car seat in one hand and like a 40-pound toddler in the other? Any moms here that are like, that's my life, maybe? Or that you just like have heavy things that you actually pull and push around? I think that I hear that a lot from women, where you're like, oh, I really am afraid to start strength training. And I'm like, but you carry your 30-pound car seat and pick up your 40-pound toddler and you're afraid of a 10-pound kettlebell? No, you're so much stronger than you think you are. And I just really want to offer that and be offering some guidance about how not to really be afraid of this stuff, and really to be having these overall concepts of what it is that we're strength training for, which is for neurological capacity, for hinging and pulling capacity, and how that can really amplify our movement patterns and our comfort more broadly. Okay, any questions on like what strength training is or why we should do it? We're all sold. We've all drank the Kool-Aid. Okay. All right. So I'm sure this is like all over Instagram or whatever, but benefits of strength training. I just want to mention these here. I won't spend too much time waxing poetic on it, but the big one that I want to say is less pain. I find that how many women feel like they're actually in some type of chronic pain or discomfort, meaning they have pelvic pain, hip pain, a side joint pain, back pain, mid back pain, shoulder pain, neck pain, anything like that. Okay. So not all cases, but I would say the vast, vast majority of cases, the primary cause of musculoskeletal pain is structural weakness, the primary cause, right? And then if it is not the primary cause, I can almost guarantee, except in very rare circumstances, and specifically if you have some type of sort of genetic abnormality, essentially I have some clients like that where we're working with other stuff, but in the vast majority of cases, that even if it's not the root cause of your pain, then developing some structural strength and stability is going to be a major aspect of pain resolution, even if it's not the cause. So I'll use myself in the example here. I've had a whole host of pelvic health concerns. I've also broke my neck, my back, my pelvis twice, and my hip, right? And I spent a long time relearning how to move. Ultimately, the thing that has minimized that pain, again, structural weakness is not the cause of the pain. Blunt trauma was the cause of the pain. But what minimized the pain and has helped me move forward, literally move forward, but actually then like gain strength, gain comfort, has been adding strength training to my life. I say this as someone who danced for a long time and then was a yoga teacher for over a decade. And when I actually started prioritizing healthy strength training within a range of motion that allowed me to really be optimizing things like internal rotation, mobility of the feet, some essential actions for the female body, that my pain really did minimize. I had crippling pelvic pain pretty much every day for a decade. And I slowly kind of fought my way back primarily through building strength in my hips, back, and pelvis, right? So pain resolution being one of the primary benefits, I would say. Another one is we talked about building muscle, where improved metabolic function. So we know that muscle is sort of more metabolically expensive, so to speak, than other forms of tissue. Meaning, how many women are like trying to like eat their protein levels or like heal their microbiome or just like have better hormonal fluctuation. One primary aspect of that is having a body composition that has adequate levels of muscle tissue. And that in the sense that having these adequate levels of muscle tissue is essential for actually being able to maintain a balance in terms of our hormonal blueprint, which is governed, I won't say governed, but is really like in complete integration with our metabolism, right? Metabolic function being what is kind of governing our utilization and the creation of hormones that we have circulating through our endocrine system. So I could teach a 2-hour workshop on the relationship between metabolism and hormonal function, which I will spare you. Maybe I will put it in the chat if you want that one too. But just suffice it to say that better, like more muscle tone and more muscle volume actually is a crucial aspect of hormonal balance. Anyone here have like thyroid challenges, anything like that? Yeah. Well, sorry if that was just like loud. So I'm right there with you. I've struggled with my thyroid for a long time, and I have found that just again, I just know for myself and for my clients, but I think the research does show this more broadly, that things like hypothyroidism, Hashimoto's, that generally the more muscle mass that women have, the improvement that we see in their labs. I've definitely seen my labs improve the more I'm strength trained in a way that is ultimately not like stressful for my system overall, but actually focused on building volume. Okay. The next two I had was decrease the risk of falling and increased bone density. I mean, I want to train to be old, not hot. Like that's really my goal. I've been in enough pain as a young woman and know what it's like, that I really am interested to have like my older years actually be more comfortable than my younger years just because of my personal situation. And I think a lot of us can really have that goal in mind. So I'm like strong backs, giant ass, upright posture, orgasms into my 80s. Like that's what I'm training for. And we actually see those capacities maintained with women who have better muscle tone, right? So yeah, increased bone density, same thing. Remember when I was talking about resistance a little while ago, and that strength training is based on resistance, right? What that resistance actually, like what our muscles are like really resisting against in some ways, is our own structure. So by being able to actually put load on the bones, it stimulates bone growth and stimulates bone density. And in our modern culture, I think this has a lot to do with like heavy metals and like iron levels in our food. I think there's a lot that we could talk about that actually like really can zap bone density and zap calcium deposits. That's again a whole other sort of like microbiology topic that we're not going to get into. But suffice to say, there's a lot in our modern culture that is not actually movement related or even like lifestyle related, but just more like environmentally related, that minimizes bone density and bone health specifically for women as we age, right? And so having an extra capacity to just really be supporting the health of our bones is crucial. And there's actually only like the way that that occurs is largely through resistance training and impact training, right? We talk a lot about like, oh, I want like high intensity intervals and like low impact workouts. And I'm over here for being like low intensity workouts or low intensity intervals and like working impact, not low impact, right? Because I want impact to build my bones and I don't want super high intensity in many ways because that can actually stress out my adrenaline and my hormonal blueprint and can affect my ovulation. So not super high intensity and also with some aspect of plyometrics, right? So I just want to be pointing this out because just like with, oh, push-ups and squatting, and I'm like, well, maybe those are for men. What about, pull-ups and hinging? Or like, oh, high intensity and low impact. I'm like, or maybe actually a little more impact and lower intensity. I think a lot of the kind of primary like buzzwords that we hear in strength training might not actually be geared optimally towards our female bodies. The impact one, again, that can take some training. I'm not asking us to all go like pound the pavement, right? That can obviously, have its own public health implications, which we'll get to in a bit. But I don't want us to be like afraid of being like springy and athletic and bouncy and having that be an aspect of our training, which I feel like a lot of training that's geared towards women is like super low impact, meaning like we should only like do Pilates or do like a yoga flow or like have something that doesn't actually have any sense of sort of plyometric impact, which ultimately I think is not serving us and our strength long term. Okay. And then my last one, this should be my first one, is improved pelvic function. Okay, I obviously do write books on this topic, but the relationship of our strength and our structural capacity to our pelvic function is absolutely crucial. Meaning, who here has ever had like a chronic pelvic infection, painful sex, pelvic organ prolapse, like any type of pelvic health concern? Having having a strong and stable pelvis, essentially, where our external pelvic tissues, right, all of these external tissues, so think our glutes, our QL, our hamstrings down here, are all actually really supporting the pelvic bones, is going to allow for more freedom with these tissues within the pelvis. If these external tissues are not supportive, right, of our pelvic structure, then these internal pelvic tissues try to pick up that mantle. And what does that mean? We often get some congestion. So we get some tucking of the tailbone, we get some narrowing of the sit bones, we get some congestion or lack of mobility or restriction within our pelvis, within our internal tissues. Who's ever felt like this? Like, oh, I like stretch and stretch, but it like never feels different, or I feel just sort of like tight, or maybe sex doesn't feel that great. Maybe it's like hard for me to have an orgasm, anything like that. That is all directly related to, in many cases, a lack of structural stability and essentially a lack of strength in the hips and low back. And I think we can talk a lot about the emotional healing and the vaginal microbiome and like our nervous system healing in regards to our pelvic health concerns. But I think it's definitely underemphasized the role that our strength and structural function play in healing those pelvic health concerns. This is certainly true for diastasis and prolapse. Capiche? Okay, any questions? So again, this was like, why strength train? You want to strength train. These are all some things to keep in mind. Okay. The setbacks of modern movement. So we all know that many of us don't move as much as we want to, but it's not just the sort of quantity of movement, it's also the quality of movement. And there are 4 things that I identified here that I see that I really need to work into my daily life that ultimately are going that we can recreate in a strength training perspective. So I already mentioned this one, but the lack of pulling. Pulling was like a very basic action of human living, right? I grew up farming. I feel like I definitely was like dragging. There's some dragging in farming. Um, but then we were also just talking about like pulling a well, pulling a wagon, pulling a rickshaw, pulling a cart, pulling water, like pulling laundry. Like this is a very common action. The other thing that goes along with pulling is I guess that's a separate one. I'll get to that in a moment. But I think a lot of the exercise that we currently have focused in for women's health is pushing based. So I know that like I definitely push in yoga. What some of these ones that I made is I like am like pushing a spoon around while I'm cooking. I know that might seem mild, but it's just like all these actions living. I'm like pushing a door open. I'm like pushing the dishwasher in. I'm, you kind of like push yourself to get like up off of your bed. Like these, we have pushing in our actions of daily living, which is fine. All those things are normal. But the amount that we push compared to the amount that we pull has been entirely imbalanced in our modern movement culture, right? So we no longer are doing the daily actions of pulling. One thing that pushing does, and everyone just push your hands out in front of you and just like round your upper back like you're just like you're doing a plank pose or something, right? What this is doing is this is lengthening. Do we feel how it's like sort of broadening across our whole back body? We're taking all of the muscles in our back and we're actually lengthening them, right, in order to create this shape, right? Now, what actually needs to happen for me to like hold my spine up, right? For me to untuck my tailbone, for me to like hold my baby and not like hang into my back, is those muscles all actually need to be able to shorten, right? And so I need to be able to, and I don't really like the terms like extend and contract. I feel like they can be a little confusing because you can contract a muscle in a lengthened or a shortened state. So I want to really have it be visually clear that we, in our like back muscles and shoulder muscles, are often really emphasized on, we are trying to like create space, but we really need to be working on these pulling actions. Likewise, in our butt, how many women feel like they are maybe like long in their hamstrings, but their hips are tight. You're like, oh, I can like easily touch the floor, but like my hips or my back feel tight. Well, this is another one where we're often, we have this like challenge to really shorten our hamstrings, to really like contract those hamstrings and to be able to then activate our glutes. So get our glutes to work in a lengthened state, which what would require some lengthening of the glutes would be some untuck the tailbone and some hinging. So I'm pushing that booty back where all these tissues are getting longer, as opposed to everyone right now just like squeeze your bum hole, just like squeeze your glutes. And all those tissues get shorter and they shove the pelvis forward. So we are really interested in how can we actually activate our glutes in a lengthened state and activate our hamstrings in a shortened state, right? And all of those actions are created through pulling, right? So pulling, lack of pulling, something that's missing from our modern movement. The second, and we obviously then in strength training for our female body, we would really emphasize, and I choose to emphasize pulling actions. So things that are going to help us rotate our thorax, so rotate our rib basket. So I'm thinking of like a resistance band pull right from the wall. I'm thinking of, rather than like an overhead press, I'm thinking of an overhead pull down. Oh, it feels great. That just cracked my upper back. Great. I'm thinking of we're going to get to hanging in a minute, but that's also related. Okay, actually, we'll just kind of skip ahead to hanging. So a lack of pulling is also related to a lack of hanging. And I mean, yes, like maybe hanging things on a line, but I also mean actually hanging from your arms, right? If we never hang from our hands, it's as crucial as we are standing on our feet. Like that is the design of the structure. So if in our modern life, I love that you've been working on hanging for a year. Good for you. So in the structure of our modern life, we're actually never adding these hanging actions into our build and into our musculature. We're really missing out on that ability to like really support our whole back body, support our spinal curves, which in turn support our pelvis, right? So things like that is like, oh, pull-ups are hard, but even just like working on a dead hang, being able to do the monkey bars, being able to climb a tree, right? We see kids do this all the time, right? We see like little children like want to hang, want to climb, right? There's a reason all of these are like if you watch kids play. Also, if, who is any woman here ever had a baby that could like hang? They could like support their body weight. I feel like I tried this with all the babies that I come across. I'm like, I won't trap you, but like I want to see if you can hang. And just these are intrinsic actions. And I find that as women, yes, kids are my inspiration. I know mine too. And I was okay. Also, I just want you to know, I was not an athletic child. Like I was an unathletic, pretty uncoordinated child. I was like not particularly gifted at movement. And then I was bedridden for multiple years. And I now feel like I have a pretty high athletic capacity. And so like if I can do it, you can do it. I really just want to mention that. So, okay. But this reality of actually creating time to hang in our daily life, and this can be um, like hanging. I don't know. I have like a hanging bar and a door frame in my house, which I think is helpful. But even just like at the playground, or even just the idea of like reaching up to grab the crown molding, and just like actually how much of your body weight can you take, having that sense of grip strength. These are all actions that are kind of missing, right? And these are some setbacks in our modern movement that we would absolutely be recreating in our strength training. I just thought it always also just feels so good to hang. Yeah, who is ever, we're interested in actually creating spaciousness. I don't like the term lengthen the spine because it doesn't really make sense, but I do like the language of saying, can I pick one vertebrae up above the other? Right? When we shrink, it's usually we only shrink in two places, between our rib basket and our pelvis and in our cervical spine. It's because we actually have compression and displacement of the discs and compression in our vertebrae in those areas. And hanging really allows for that uprighted posture to be maintained and creating that like trunk stability. And I would say like the true core strength that's required. And so hanging actions go right along with pulling actions, and then you pull them together and you can eventually do things like a pull up or that type of, you know, movement. Now, I want to really be relating these to our women's health. And so I'm going to come back in a minute as to like why I chose these and why they're related. Okay, so lack of pulling, lack of hanging. Another setback of our modern movement is a lack of mobility in the feet, right? Lack of mobility in the feet. We wear modern shoes and we walk on flat surfaces, right? This is huge. A lack of mobility and strength in the feet is a lack of mobility and strength in the pelvic floor. Full stop, right? Our fascial tissues that lift our arches go all the way up the inseams of the leg, up the sides of the vaginal canal, and really tent and come to fruition in the cervix, right? So think like drop cervix, dropped arches, right? It's not always quite that direct, but we want this cervical mobility, and it goes directly with the arch of the feet mobility because of the unique structure of the body. Also, if our feet aren't strong and mobile, if they're not able to absorb shock, then the shock gets absorbed higher up the chain. How many women ever feel like their knees ache after they like run? This is me for a long time. Definitely get shin splints. My feet aren't moving well, then like something else is taking that impact. One of the primary things any women feel like when they run or jog or hop, that their pelvic floor feels stressed out, right? Or that their prolapse feels a little less awesome or whatever. I definitely felt that way. And this is one thing that's really helped me with that is training plyometrics in my feet, training the sense of springiness and good foot mobility. Because as those feet are moving, then they're really doing, I keep doing this action, but they're really doing this action. And that means I'm not having this like, sense of impact that's traveling all the way up the chain. My back would start hurting immediately whenever I would run in the last few years. Yeah, I hear that. I definitely have felt, all sorts of discomfort with that type of thing. And what I find here is often if my glutes aren't really firing, we talked about hinging before, and my quads are just pulling me along, I don't have good hinging actions, I don't have good mobility in the feet, then I'm just going to feel that impact higher up the chain, right? And we were talking about sort of this lack of rotation that needs to happen when I'll back up. with pulling, right? If you go back to the pulling actions, one thing that pulling allows for is it's like rotating our thorax. It's like helping with this twist action. Hanging is helping with these elongating actions, right? Good mobility of the feet is helping with these shock absorbing actions, right? A lack of rotation in the thorax, a lack of spaciousness in the spine, a lack of mobility in the feet. All of these are going to, or strength and mobility in the feet. All of these are going to show up often as pain patterns and the lack of mobility or a sense of heaviness for women, primarily in the hips, pelvis, and low back, right? Because I will either be like jammed down, sinking down. I won't have good rotation in my ribs, so my respiratory diaphragm can't move super well, which is going to stress out my pelvic floor, right? Or if my feet aren't moving super well, it's going to stress out my knees, hips, low back, right? And things aren't actually going to be moving appropriately. And these are some of the setbacks of modern life, is it minimizes these essential actions for our female body, right? Just the reality of modern living. Is this feeling clear? So something like lack of mobility in the feet, which like lack, like just wearing, I don't know, running shoes and running on pavement, which I've done for thousands of miles in my lifetime, right? It's not actually training any functional movement. I know for me, it's definitely contributed to my prolapse, which doesn't mean it has to be that way, but it means I really want to therefore strength training so I can do the athletic endeavors that interest me, because those actions need to be reestablished for me to be able to do these other actions of daily living, of which running is totally one of, without having it be compromising to the rest of the system and structure. Okay. Capiche? Okay. The fourth one, so lack of pulling, lack of hinging, lack of mobility in the feet, is lack of hinging. I already spoke to this a little bit, but this hinging is the primary way that we turn on our glutes while creating length in our glutes, right? And that is a crucial magoosh action for the female body. How can I fire my glutes in a lengthened state? Fire my glutes in a lengthened state. This is what keeps me from being perpetually tucked in my tailbone or compressed here. It also keeps, even if I don't have that pelvic posture, but my glutes aren't working, right? It keeps my low back from overworking essentially, or from having kind of attempting to do my gluteal work from my abdomen, which ultimately can put a lot of pressure on my pelvic organs, on my abdominal organs, which is not optimal either. Our abdominal muscles are not primarily stabilizers, despite what everyone might say. You can watch my other masterclass all about the core, which is not what this one's about, but where we talk all about the physiology of the female core, right? But how our primary stabilizers are going to be our glutes, our hamstrings, and our QL, and how they need to be able to lengthen and do their work, not contract and do their work, because that's going to limit our pelvic mobility, right? While they're contracted, which isn't helpful. We actually need to have good pelvic mobility while those muscles are turned on. And the primary action that's going to create that is hinging, right? So this is lacking from modern movement. One, because we're constantly working on elevated surfaces, right? So I'm not actually cooking on the ground or close to the ground. I'm not actually folding on the ground or close to the ground, washing on the ground or close to the ground. Working on elevated surfaces, that's fine. We can do that. But then we really need to have this nutritious reintegration of hinging into our actions of daily living, right? Yeah. So and just like floor-based work, ground-based work, this is what would create these hinging shapes. So what I just went through, just to recap. So these lack of pulling, which with that comes lack of thoracic rotation, lack of hanging, which with that comes lack of spinal extension, lack of mobility in the feet, which with that comes lack of sort of springiness, athleticism, and like joint impact, and lack of hinging, which with that comes compression of our internal pelvic tissues, right? Those are, I would say, the primary kind of qualms of our modern lifestyle, and specifically how they negatively impact our female physiology. Does that all feel clear? Okay, does this feel totally new to anyone? Have you ever like thought about it quite this way? Okay, so now I'm like, so why strength train? Like when I train women, these are the actions that I focus on replacing, right? Among others. I mean, I do pushing as well, because we need to still be able to push our body weight around, because pushing is an action in daily life as well. But the pushing, pulling, the hinging, and then the lunging / squatting, those also need to happen as well. But these are the primary actions that I'm really going to be training and cueing if I'm training women if I'm encouraging women to strength train, because um, all of these movements, all these actions that existed within these movements of daily living were ultimately what would keep our female bodies functioning long term. Right. And so if we are not doing this stuff on a daily basis, then we actually need to reintegrate that into our lives to be able to maintain our women's health in a broader capacity. So when everyone's like, oh wait, do we all need to strength train? I'm like, yeah. Like I don't yeah, I don't really, that's kind of my answer. Does that mean now what does that mean? Yes, that means something different for somebody else. But if I'm defining strength training as having some form of resistance, meaning I'm moving something heavy under load while prioritizing these actions, yes, we all do need to do that. That is what our human body was evolved to do. This is how these are no longer happening in our modern culture. And we are seeing the repercussions, right? We're seeing the pelvic health and the women's health repercussions. And there's no amount of better breathing practice. I mean, breathing practices are amazing, but there's no amount of just microbiome, hormonal balancing, breathing practices. There's no amount of that that's going to actually be able to fully support your pelvic health. Because if those tissues aren't actually mobile, hydrated, and healthy, they can't perform those functions. Tissues that aren't mobile, healthy, getting blood flow, hydrated, full lymphatic flow, atrophy, and atrophy tissues are more prone to infection and dysfunction. Full stop. Right. So there's no way that we can actually separate this aspect of functional, a nutritious movement, to take Katie Bowman's term, from the reality of our female health and our pelvic health long term. Is anyone pregnant here? Any mamas or soon to be mamas? I'm sure there will be some. Oh, hi. Oh, I see you. I'm sorry to be a minute. Hi, Amanda. Congratulations on your pregnancy. So I feel like we talk a lot about, or I talk a lot about physiological birth, right? You're like, oh, I want to be able to have physiological birth. I want to be able to have, this natural birth and have my tissues move. But we don't really talk about physiological womanhood. We don't really talk about how, what preparation for birth would be. Is actually getting all of our tissues to move in this healthy way, right? All these actions are a rotation of the thorax, spaciousness in the pelvic floor, internal rotation of the femurs, this good hinging. All of these are actual actions that are, part of the birth process in a physiological unfolding. And the ability to have those actions really be owned by the body is absolutely a part of preparing for the birth process. And, I think we think a lot about, you're like, oh, we don't need to do anything to prepare for birth. Birth will just happen, which totally, yeah, the body is incredible and it's so resilient, and women give birth under, absolutely suboptimal conditions and it still works, absolutely. But then we might actually have a harder time in motherhood. We might actually not feel strong or supported. Our back might hurt when we're holding that little baby, right? We might actually have some pelvic health dysfunction or pelvic health concerns. And really being able to wrap this all up into the requirement of what it actually means to be a woman, and to be able, not to be a woman, but what it means to be able to carry a child and birth a child. That's also what these actions are based on. And that is relevant even if you never want to do that. Even if you're never going to have a baby. I don't have any children. And if you're never going to have a child and never going to birth a baby, if your training is not actively supporting your capacity to do so, then it's actively minimizing your pelvic health long term, because that's the actual function of your pelvic tissues, whether or not you're going to reproduce. Okay, so relevant for birth, relevant for postpartum, relevant for physiological womanhood. Okay. All right, we're doing pretty good. We're doing pretty good on time. Okay. Practical techniques and exercises you can incorporate into your daily routine to make everyday tasks easier and more effortless. That's what I wrote. I'm like, how appealing does that sound? We're now going to go through, this is your take notes time of this lecture, because this is some stuff you can do. These are some simple swaps that are ways that you can incorporate some of these actions into your daily life. Okay. Pulling. The first one, if you have kiddos, I know that I'm talking a lot about having kids, and if that's not you, trust me, I have other ones for you as well. But swap a stroller for a wagon. Yes, your little one can go in a wagon, right? And if they, are tottery or whatever, then we can teach them to sit down. But swapping a stroller for a wagon can just automatically shift maybe a huge aspect of that. Other things that we could work on Pulling would just be like, I grew up farming and I would have a wheelbarrow, right? I would pull it, like push it, or I would turn around and I would hold it and I would like stand between the rungs and I would walk and I would pull it behind me. This is someone that always felt better to me intrinsically as a child that grew up on horse farm. And I like in hindsight, I'm like, oh, right. It's like activating my posterior chain and I'm like pulling from my back body rather than pushing and compressing my front line. So those are just a few pulling swaps in our daily life. Ultimately, pulling can be a hard one to work into daily life, which is why I think we should strength train. Okay. Foot mobility. This one is a little easier to work into daily life, but walking on uneven surfaces, walking barefoot, I think that these actions of just getting our feet to come alive, like have you talked to them today? Have you touched them? Have you spread your toes? Have you done some sensory stuff for your feet? Have you gotten them awake? Also, there's a ton of cool Instagram accounts all about the feet. Maybe I have several that I follow. Maybe Carissa can link a few if you in the chat, or we'll put them in the like below the recording. But there's like so many kind of like foot exercises you can do, obviously, but even without those, just the action of actually picking something up with your feet. I feel like I do this with kids anytime I'm with children. I'm like, can we actually like take our socks on and off with our own feet? Can we like pick up something? Can I try to like pick up, you know, I mean, I don't know. Kids often get bored of stuff quickly, but I'm like, how many Legos can we pick up with our feet and put in the bucket? You know what I mean? Just like actually having some good dexterity and grip can be really nice. Also, heel raises. This one is super simple and straightforward, but I find if I'm feeling like stiff and like just not great in my body, then heel raises can be super helpful. And the crucial component here is rather than like rolling to the outside, if this is my big toe mound, this is my heel, often we like come like up and we like roll to the outside, really kind of pushing through, right? And coming straight up in terms of actually doing those heel raises. And they're when I'll like do them on a door frame, I'll do them on my stairs, I'll do them like when I'm doing dishes, right? Just like actually taking what 2 minutes to get your feet moving. And then like I wonder how your back and your body feels. Just like something easy to incorporate. Okay. Hanging. Do dead hangs at the playground, right? If maybe you have a hang bar in your house, maybe have like some rings hung up that you can just utilize. I always, I have a bar like this in my house, and I find that just like 10 seconds right when I get out of bed, just like makes my body come alive. Where I'm just like, whoa, I'm like awake and it like activates my musculature where it's like, oh, I stand on my feet and I hang from my hands, right? And even just that action, let's just all imagine if we did that for 30 days. Just like if you actually hung for 10 seconds a day for 30 days, like we would have a appreciable difference in not only the spaciousness in our vertebrae, but also the ability to retract in our scapulas and to really like activate our lats and just like feel more stable in that upper body. So, okay. And guess what? If you can't hang comfortably, we can work up to it. And this is, I definitely have some things in my strength training program that are about that, about ways to really work with, I don't know who's unmuted, but they're going somewhere. But even just being able to like hang with your feet on the ground, I think this is a great one, where I am like, I know I'm not like in the gym. I don't have an ability to do this right here, but it's like, I'm imagining I'm like sitting in a chair, essentially, like my upper body and like my knees are bent and my feet are flat on the floor. And so then I can like do like a pull up, but I'm pushing from my feet. Like I'm like helping myself stand up. So even if you can't totally support your weight with a dead hang, those can be really, really helpful. And guess what? If you lack that shoulder range of motion, then that's something that's definitely going to be assisted by pulling. By pulling actions. It's going to start helping your thorax rotate, and that thoracic rotation is essential for being able to have this range of motion, right? We actually need all of these tissues around our rib basket to be able to glide, to be able to have the shoulder blade mobility, to be able to lift up with the arm. So they're all related. Okay. And then the last one, so we talked about pulling, we talked about foot mobility, we talked about hanging, and then also hinging. Give me 1 second, women. hinging. So hinging, what do we all want to stand up and try this? Do we all just want to like take a beat and like stand up for our pelvic health? Okay. And if you've been in any of my stuff lately, I'm like on a hinging kick. So lucky you, you get to work on this together. Okay. All right. Okay. So can you all see me pretty clearly? All right. So what I mean by hinging, right? A basic hinge, right? We think about being primarily bilateral, meaning I'm going to come forward with my chest, but more so the hinge comes from the pelvis. So I go like, oh, look, I'm hinging, but I'm like leading with my chest instead of my pelvis. So for me, the first thing is going to be my butt's actually going to go back, 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 and then come forward, 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 forward. So let's all just try that for a sec. So just back, 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 back. We see that my hips are behind the line of my leg. Now, I could hinge from my upper body and see that my hip is not nearly moving back as far, right? And that's where I'm initiating from my upper body. That's not what I'm talking about. I want us to actually initiate from the pelvis, where my butt is moving back, and that's what's creating the shape, right? So yes, this is not a squat where my knees are bending. My knees are actually staying pretty stable as I hinge, right? So this is the first one. The ones I like even more are going to be unilateral, so meaning one leg in front of the other. So I'm going to stand here. My front knee is bent just over the line of the foot. Would you mute yourself, please, whoever you are? Okay, thank you. So my foot's bent. I'm sorry, my knee is bent. And notice here, I have to say, my knee is bending from my knee. My knee is not bending from my hip. I'm not dropping my hip to bend my knee. I'm just tap, 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 tap. My knee comes forward. Now, I am going to send my butt back, 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 back. My glute is lengthening as it's firing. My knee is stable. And then I send my butt forward, 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 forward to dehinge. I say it again, where I go peach, 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 peach. My butt is becoming this peachy shape. And then I de-peach, de-peach, de-peach as I come up. My foot is relaxed. I'm working on this side. So this is something I can totally do in my daily life. I was just talking to a client this morning where she says she like has her laundry on her bed and she hinges to pick something up, or like to fold and then stands up. She hinges to fold and then stands up, as opposed to doing this to fold her laundry. She does this to fold her laundry, and she comes up and down in a hinge. And she's like, oh, and then when I get tired, I switch sides, right? And then I go, oh, I'm just going to hinge and really be activating as I do this. I'm going to check these questions. My hamstrings are insanely tight during the hinge. Yeah, then what I would work on for you, Mary Navarre, are some things that are would be like, and that we do this in my strength training course actually. Let me come back to my nest. Just because I want to be able to see all of you. So yeah, hamstrings being really tight during our hinging. So did anybody else feel that? Hamstrings not wanting to let you hinge? Okay, cool. But then can you like easily like touch the floor? No. Okay, cool. So if the answer is no, that you struggle with a hamstring length, and have you maybe tried to stretch your hamstrings for years and nothing's ever happened? Does that feel like, yeah, you're like, correct. So what is usually the case there is there's no such thing as a tight muscle. That doesn't exist. It's not an anatomical reality. What we have is a muscle that's locked. And a muscle that's locked is a muscle that is immobilized. So that muscle is unable to lengthen Well, okay, I'll put it this way. So muscles, their primary action is simplicity, meaning their ability to lengthen and shorten, right? Now they can lengthen, I don't like to say contract, but they can lengthen in like a somewhat flaccid way, and they can shorten in a flaccid way, or they can lengthen in an active way. Who here just felt their glutes when they were doing any of those little hinges? Anybody feel their butt turned on? Okay, cool. So that's an example of it's lengthening while the muscle is contracting, right? So a muscle can lengthen while contracting, or it can shorten while contracting while the muscle's firing. It can also lengthen while being flaccid and shorten while being flaccid. But when a muscle feels tight, we often think that that muscle is, sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit. This will be clearer. Our muscles can be locked in one of two ways. They can either be locked in a lengthened state, meaning they struggle to shorten, or they can be locked in a shortened state, meaning they struggle to lengthen, right? But that feeling of the muscle being tight is the feeling of immobility. It's the feeling of that muscle not actually being able to change shape, rather than the feeling of that muscle being like shortened. Does that make sense? How many women here feel like, oh, I have chronically tight hips, but you actually can like sit cross-legged on the floor? Okay, cool. But your hips always like feel tight, right? They're locked in a lengthened state, right? And so you have that feeling of tightness, and that tightness is actually a feeling of immobility or restriction, it's not actually pertinent to the length of the muscle. Does that make sense? So for a lot of people, this is sort of like a stuck door concept. If you're like, oh, my hamstrings are so chronically restricted, there's a few things that, one, if you really want to focus on the hamstrings, then often if you're like, oh, if you go to lengthen them and they just don't go, then I would just get them to move first. So maybe you actually have to shorten your hamstrings. Maybe you actually have to contract your hamstrings. Maybe you actually have to do like a back heel, or do like any of the like feet on the wall. Or I have a bunch of exercises in my strength training course that are about this, that are getting our hamstrings to actually contract while shortening, right? And those actions might just get your hamstring moving, which it's the movement of the hamstring that's going to eventually change its shape, not just like the pulling on the static locked structure. Does that feel clear for both of you, my hamstring queens? Okay, cool. There's one other thing that I wanted to say about this, and like the hamstring shortness and the restriction. I mean, the same thing. Oh, okay. Yeah. So one thing could be like the actual hamstrings, they're locked short. They actually need to be mobilized, maybe through like being under load, right? They actually need to like work and contract to get the muscle moving for it to then be able to have more sense of simplicity. But if you're just like pulling on a short structure and nothing's moving, like that's just not actually going to do that much. Does that make sense? You're just like hanging on something that's not moving to begin with. The other thing is, why are they in that shape in general? And one reason might be we're not actually great at hinging. So we actually have, which you're both like, oh, when I hinge, which I don't mean you're not great at hinging. I mean, we're all works in progress. But I mean, that ability to get our glutes to fire in a lengthened state is what is going to let the hamstrings relax, right? And if for 10 years, 20 years, we've never actually found that spaciousness in our pelvic floor, we've maybe had a tucked tailbone and clenched our butt, right? Then we aren't ever putting the pelvis in a shape that's inherently going to lengthen the hamstrings. We're actually putting in the pelvis in a shape that's going to shorten the hamstrings over time. And so, yes, getting those hamstrings to move is going to be a huge part of it, but also helping the pelvis move into a different orientation, which I know you're like, whoa, that's really hard, but I feel it in hinging. That's also going to help, because if our like bones are chronically putting the muscles into a position where they're unable to move, then that's going to be their resting shape. Does that feel clear? Okay, cool. When you're doing any movement, is your stomach loose? After a life of ballet, I'm holding my abs constantly. Anybody else do this? Hold their abs constantly? Okay. So, is it loose? No, it's not loose, but it's not gripping either. And the idea that, and I'm also, Amanda, just because this is a big question, and I have truly a 2-hour workshop answering this question. So I want you to watch that one. It's free. It's a good one. So if you're looking here at my abdomen, now I can like suck in, right? That's like getting this to move, right? Or I can like breathe and have my lungs and my transverse abdominals gently like support, right? It's gently hugging towards my spine. But what's not happening is, so if you're going to look at me, it's the difference between like some abdominal engagement versus the like contraction in and around my navel, right? I don't have, I don't know how clear that was just in my own brief demo. But essentially, I have found what actually has brought true abdominal strength, right? Our abdominal muscles, our rectus abdominis, which is that like outermost abdominal muscle, which is often the ones if we're like sucking in that we're utilizing, is very thin. It's like, I think I've heard it, if you've ever, doesn't matter. I would say it's about the width of like maybe some tinfoil. Like it's like a very thin membranous musculature. It's not a major stabilizing muscle versus our transverse abdominals, as well as our internal external obliques, which are going to be activated more through like all of these other more like weight bearing, holding weight actions, right? I like that is actually, in my opinion, going to develop more true core health and true core strength for women. So for you, I would say one thing is like, can you like, what is it like to soften your abdomen, right? But it's probably not going to be like totally distended, if that makes sense. And so, yeah. And then ultimately, I want other muscles to be able to work. And I find sometimes if we overemphasize our abdominal muscles, we actually don't get a lot of our posterior chain to work as well. So there might be a period of relearning where you're just like really focusing on not overusing the abdominals, but not because it's inherently like wrong. I just don't want us to use the abdominals by posteriorly tilting the pelvis, clenching in and around our buttocks, and like lengthening our back body. Again, that's a huge topic, and I want to refer you to my True Core Health webinar. Okay. So we just talked briefly about hinging. You can do that while you're doing the dishes. You can do it while you're folding laundry. You can do it while you're picking things up off the floor. And I had a mom say to me, she was like, oh, wow, when I do that, I have to like slow down. And it's actually just like better for my nervous system. And I'm like, I'm not a mom. And I should do that. I should slow down and move better for my nervous system, right? And then we're actually taking the time to create those new neurological pathways, and it's going to be really helpful. Okay. I missed most of this talk, toddler, but I'm curious, understandable. But I'm curious about your course, and I'm pregnant. Can you speak to that? Yes, I'll get to that in a bit. What's a good stance to be in when lifting weights? Hallie, I don't know what you mean. There's 1,000 different lifts you can do. Are you pushing? Are you pulling? Are you dumbbell? Are you squatting? Are you hinging? Are you deadlifting? Like, I don't know what you're lifting, or how you're lifting. So I don't know how to answer that question. Okay. We already talked about how all of this can be related, that like all the structural weakness can be related, can be a root cause of pain. We got to that. So SI joint pain, hip pain, mid back pain. Anybody, I know we've had some of those in this group, right? How getting all of these actions to actually fire better and have our muscles be able to support the bones in that way is going to be really helpful. Okay, strategies to support your pelvic health so you can heal while strength training. I will get into this more in a bit, but I'll get into this more in one of my offerings. But the first thing that I will say is, if anyone does not like, if they just like feel crummy when they like go to strength train or go do something athletic, and you're like, oh, this either doesn't feel good in my back or my hips or my knees or my pelvis, the first thing I would do is do some breath work. And I would do breath work prior to being under load. So what I mean by that is, for me, if like every time if I'm in a strength train, I would start by just like working on some rib decompression, working on some lateral flexion. I'm going to take probably 5 minutes, and really doesn't have to take long, but I'm really interested in getting some expansion in my upper back, breathing into my back body without tucking my tailbone, and getting some like lateral flexion and some rib in my side ribs. If I don't do that first, my strength training doesn't feel good to me, right? It actually stresses out my pelvic floor. And it doesn't take a lot. It takes like a few minutes, right? But really doing that prior to load has made all the difference for me. I also, in all of my training, I have a glute and hamstring focus, back body, boom da bum. Your glutes are your queens, right? We really want to have soft bellies, giant asses, strong backs, right? That's what I'm here for. So I train that way, right? And so I try to figure out how I can actually utilize my glutes and hamstrings in most actions, in most exercises. And I pick ones that are putting my pelvis in a position of stability to allow for that. So I know that a lot of you were like, I don't want to screw it up. Like I want to strength train, but I don't want to like screw up. I'm like afraid that it's going to like harm me. This is the list for you right here. Breath work prior to load with expansion in your posterior rib basket without tucking your tailbone prior to actually picking up a weight or using any resistance. The second one is glute and hamstring focus. How do you turn your glutes on? How do you turn your hamstrings on? Right. And how do you do this in a variety of like, how do you access that in as many shapes as you can? Right. And so like picking exercises that do that is going to be really helpful. And along with that, for that glute and hamstring focus comes pelvic mobility without clenching, right? So how do I learn to turn on my glutes without squeezing my bum hole? How do I like not clench my vagina in order to like do something? How do I not just squeeze my butt cheeks together to engage my glutes? How I actually get my whole pelvis moving and fluid under load, right? Without clenching. And that often takes really good breath work. That just takes focus, right? And learning some management of how to do that and really being aware. I'm thinking of what was your name? Emily and Mary DeVere that were like, okay, how do I actually like not like I bet if you have really tight hamstrings and struggle with the hinge that you might also be bum clenchers, right? So how do we relax that action and how do I learn to actually do a different action? That's going to be a crucial aspect of strength training in a way that isn't going to compromise your pelvic health. Okay. And the last one is true core engagement. So this is not sucking in. This is not bracing. I forget the lovely woman that just asked this question. Amanda. So true core engagement, you're not like holding, right? But you're actually having your transverse abdominals move in and out with every breath that you take. So your respiratory diaphragm is moving, your pelvic diaphragm is moving, and your transverse abdominals are moving. And all of those are moving with your loads. And initially that will probably take some micromanagement, moving to macro management, moving to less management, and you can just breathe freely because you already have those movements established. But having those pillars is going to make your strength training specifically supportive for your female body. Obviously, those are like the internal stuff. And then I really like focusing on what I said before, which is like foot strength and mobility, hinging, internal rotation, pulling, hanging, as opposed to maybe some of the other like deadlift actions and stuff like that. Which it's not that those actions aren't great, but really how do I do them and really prioritize the hinging? Okay. All right, last thing, and then I'll get to these questions. And then, okay, you want to become stronger and healthier woman or mother, but you have a lot of demands in your life and you feel tired and you're freaking busy. I just want to say that this doesn't have to be a lot. I think if you can strength train for 30 minutes twice a week, that it's going to be really different for you. Like that, just that alone, right? I would say that I go to the gym, I strength train twice a week. At this point in my life, I've strength trained 4 days a week at some points, but right now that's just what I can manage in my busy schedule. And I feel great, right? And I like walk and I do other stuff, but my ability to do that other stuff hinges on me actually strength training for 2 days a week, right? And whether I do 30 minutes or an hour, I often will still hit the same points. It'll just matter how many times I go through a circuit, right? Do I do it twice or do I do it 3 times? Do I do a lengthy warm up or a cool down? So I can tailor it to the amount of time that I have. The other aspect of it is if you're short on time, then working on how to incorporate it into your daily tasks, which is what we talked about in this class, is going to be also the Krush Magoosh component. How do I not just walk around squeezing my bum all day, every day? How do I, like learn to sit and hinge and breathe? And I have a ton of, resources on this stuff. But that's also going to be really crucial, especially if you're like, don't have a ton of time to allocate towards the gym because maybe you can only get there for 45 minutes once or twice a week. Then, or like, I mean, you can do this stuff at home, but you know what I mean? Like set aside that time, then really working on the stuff that we can incorporate into actions of daily living is going to be incredibly life changing. I mean, it sounds a little dramatic, but like, I actually mean it. Like that's what's going to help your tissues change shape and structure over time is figuring out how to incorporate it. Yeah, and then the last one is just slowing down to actually do it. I spoke a little bit about healing the nervous system, but how really taking a little more time to do stuff is going to be super helpful. Okay, so all right, and we have 5 minutes left for questions. Yes. Okay. What I wanted to offer and just tell you all about, so hopefully you'll learn some things about strength training, is I have a course that is called Strength Training for the Female Body. So if you want to learn how to do this stuff and have workouts made for you, circuits made for you, they're in 4 different categories: pushing, pulling, hinging, and lunging / squatting. But all of the cues within them, we talk about the spaciousness in the posterior pelvic floor, the internal rotation, the mobility of the feet. So you're learning these essential female cues within strength training actions. And the whole course is set up. I make a bunch of workouts for you, but then also for you to learn how to make your own. And there's a plan for you, like an 8-week plan to follow, and then how to adapt this stuff if you like to continue on more fully in your strength training. There's follow along circuit videos, there's myofascial release videos, there's a bunch of stuff, and like everything from a protein guide to how to do this stuff at home. So if you're interested in this and want my guidance about how to actually strength train at home, that's what my, or at the gym, you can do it at home or the gym. That's what my strength training for the female body is for. Every single exercise is an individually recorded video with the cues for that exercise. Meaning if you really want to be sure you learn how to do them right and you don't actually like stress out your pelvic health while doing them, all those videos are going to do that for you. Then I have little circuits that are recorded. So once you've learned how to do them, or maybe you're watching the class and you're like, oh, I need more help on that video, go watch the detailed video where I really break it down. So all of your questions are answered within the course.